So, time to tackle the track motor on the Poclain. It's been slowly dripping for many years, not a whole lot, but it's been dripping both when in use and when it's been parked. So we usually put a bucket under it and collect a little liter of oil after a couple of months, because this is used a little here and there, and that's sit for months. Had to remove the skid plate, and this machine has been kind of neglected. As the skid plate was lowered, the bolts was undone, it started leaking, so I tightened up a bolt to kind of reduce the leaking. Cleaned up the other side of the skid plate a little better, because maybe just focused on the side we're gonna work on to kind of see where the leak was. A little tapping, and we removed the skid plates to not have that in the way while working on the motor. A bucket, big bucket underneath, and all the bolts could be loosened. All of them, the first little bit needed some extra leverage. Once all bolts were loosened, we could add a piece of threaded rod, because it wanted an M14 to push the lid out, the same as that the swing motor, just that the bolts are M20s here, not M14s like on the swing motor. That's a smaller motor of the same size. As I removed this banjo fitting, there is a kind of a restrictor in there that was unbolted, and then a little plate with holes in it, and it was packed full of little rubber pieces that must have come from somewhere. So that was cleaned up and put back together, and the banjo bolt itself is quite crooked, must have gotten a hit at some point, so it will be interesting to see if we can get things to seal up. Tried to loosen the block here and was planning on leaving the hydraulic hoses in place on the block, but that failed because one of the bolts refused to come undone. We did try some heat, some impact, and it still refused to, but at least 3 of them came undone, and that will make things easier, because it was possible to tap it and get it to start turning, but that made it require removing the hoses. Here we did a test tapping, seeing that the bolt started turning also, so undoing hoses we are gonna do. And I missed the video of that, but they came undone quite easily. 2 pieces of M14 threaded rod, the lid, I had 2 long bolts in place to allow the lid to stay in place, and the chain block was rigged up above, so we could start lifting it off, long bolts removed, and you could start wiggling it and get it to come all the way out. Missed a little video here also, and as we started getting in there, we could see that the material at the edge here on the lid and also on the motor is quite mangled from impact with rocks and things like that. And there is kind of an expander thing here, or it's oblong, I'm not sure exactly how to call it, but as you twist it, you can turn that central distributor thing a little bit, and we should have marked the position before we removed that, I think, but I'm not sure it moved, and the movement is not very big, so some tapping, and the block on top of the distributor could be removed, and the distributor was taken out also. Took some measurements to look at what kind of copper washers would be needed. Here they had added this Tredo washer with rubber, and all the rubber was gone because the Tredo washer was a bit too small at some point. So I guess they maybe that's the rubber that was stuck in the restrictor. thought removing this plug would be enough, that because the hose that's still connected to the top is slowly feeding a little oil into the engine, so making it impossible to clean up the sealing surface. So and the plug down under here is quite damaged, but some heat and some tapping and it came undone. Turned out it wasn't low enough on the motor, so we still had to remove that hose at the top, and that is gonna cause us issues. I will cover that towards the end of the video, and we have not fired it up because we have not solved that yet. So started with a file to feel how hard the material was, and it's quite hard, so on with a flap disc to smooth out this mangled metal here. Here we are removing the problem hose on top to stop it from feeding oil into the motor, and also cleaning up the mating surface, or it's actually below where the seal is, but I think the mangled metal here has made it not sit flush against the mating surface, and I guess because it's been slowly dripping for as long as we've had the machine, so I think some expert in the old days has been here and haven't bothered with that the material was a little mangled or something, or it's just been mangled and started pushing things open at some point. The O-rings looked fine, so we reused them, just a little bit of grease. The ones on the top here had to be replaced because they had been cut as we forced the block around, but luckily I had some in a box that could be used. Cleaned up the threads, had made a makeshift thread tap from an old bolt. Just cut a slot in that, some at the bottom here. I think it's been pushed so the hole is kind of oval, not perfectly round, so some of the bolts down here are a little hard to get in and out, but looked over the mating surfaces here, and also it's kind of a ridge at the edge that I decided needed a little more material removed. Looked at refitting the plug, and I see that's so mangled that the groove for an O-ring is pretty much gone on one side, so and the option is to buy a new plug, but we're just gonna go with thread sealant. Into the cab, now I finally removed the stereo from it. It's been without power for many years because we had issues with the batteries, and realized that the stereo was just connected to one of the batteries on the 12 or on the 24 volt 2 battery system, so they were draining unevenly, so now it was pulled out because we live with some hearing protection with built-in speakers if we operate this machine. Put back the plastic that was removed earlier around the joystick. Cleaned up the mating surface, we're getting close to start assembling. Added a little silicone around here also as an extra precaution. O-ring, and then a tiny bit more silicone around the sealing surface. Then it was time to lift out the lid, reverse procedure of taking it apart, so it was lifted with the chain block, and then a little tricky, it's kind of a tight fit getting that distributor thing into the center, but a little wiggling and a few taps with a rubber mallet, and it started moving nicely. A few long bolts were added to as an extra security as we removed the lifting, that nothing would be able to slide out. Then it was just a matter of starting to tighten things up. and I went around with the, well, we have an even bigger torque wrench somewhere, but it's not mine, it's borrowed, and I didn't bother digging it out because it's kind of hidden. So torque wrench first to the maximum, then just going evenly by feel, getting it to last a little bit. The two most exposed bottom bolts here, I added the nuts on the back also, and the bolts are long enough to hold nuts. Cleaned up the inside of that plug to be able to fit the tool. Then a good amount of this thread sealing tape on there and calling it good. We'll see if it holds up. If it starts leaking, we'll address it then. And tighten up the plug. We started looking at that skid plate because that was pulling really hard on the motors and should be forced out a couple of centimeters, like an inch. We tried just pressing the two sides apart, but that didn't really give us a good. It sprung back directly, so we'll probably have to, because the central section is kind of wavy, so more on that later. To start with, we are gonna try to get the motor in place and get that machine working before we are worried about getting the skid plate back. Put back on some of the hoses to that connector block. The banjo bolt that was kind of crooked was tightened up with new copper washers. This banjo bolt was actually in good condition, the small one here. It has to do with the high-low speed activation. Things tightened up, and we started filling the motors to see if we had any leaks, and it was leaking around the banjo bolt, the big one with the restrictor, so we carefully tightened that up more, because I think that will be really tricky to be able to replace, and it eventually started sealing up. We found that the same banjo bolt on the other motor was dripping ever so little after it was cleaned up around it, so a very small leak. We have never really seen any drops from this side of the machine, so but since we were around and had new copper washers, we quickly pulled that apart and added new copper washers. That one also didn't seal at first, so we had to tighten it carefully a little more and more to compress the copper washers, but it seems to seal up fine. Yeah, I removed the electrical feed for that radio. Back to the motor. It's causing us issues. The banjo fitting up here refuses to seal. It's kind of a recess in the top. I think it's cracked there, not allowing a seal. It was not leaking when we started, so, and I tightened it up very carefully, but if it was an old crack that just hadn't fully broken or so on, I can't really see any crack, but after tightening things up after a while, it leaks from the top near the copper washer, the top copper washer. So something is not sealing. So off again after a few tries cleaning up. We tried double copper washers to kind of go into the recess that's there. Next step, we tried grinding away a little material to allow for a proper compression of a copper washer with just one of them, but it didn't seem to work either, so We might do some redneck with a metal plate and some rubber sealer, or we'll have to look at a new hose, or possibly replacing this with some adapter here and not having this banjo solution. Somehow we're gonna make this seal up and see if we can start the machine and see if the other places hold up. Time will tell. Take care out there.
Jo, men det spelar ju ingen roll, då är så liten bulk.